Benjamin Castle are Americans. Watching the footy.
Liam Ryan saying, kick it my way, I want to jump over the pack, and here he comes! Ryan!
This is Buddy Franklin! This is the greatest showman!
Got the handball off to Myers. Myers looking for the lead of Stengel. Gee, they're good. Gee, they're sharp. Razzle dazzle Rioli.
Oh, who else? McDonald! Timber!
From inside the centre square. Boys kick the goal. Boys kick the goal. From inside the centre. I can't believe
that. Good time of day, everyone. This is episode 187 of Americans Watching the Footy, our round 16 recap. I am Benjamin Castle, coming to you from San Diego, California.
And I'm Ethan Castle, coming to you from Toronto. This is our first international episode in Americans Watching the Footy history.
Wow, you didn't have to use a yell phone?
No, I think doing a whole podcast episode with shout pipes would actually be really difficult. Although it would be fun. Imagine, I'm trying to talk about the defensive pressure that Frio put on, and instead the message comes out to you that, it's like a group of larks tried to overthrow the government.
Have you gone bound for street?
I mean, I walked a half mile to get dinner, so I guess you could say that.
Very good. If you don't know what we're talking about, read the Tim Tebow Chronicles.
A 45,000-word fan fiction about Tim Tebow playing in the Canadian Football League. It's great. So the author, John Boyes, was so sick of hearing about Tim Tebow that he decided that people needed, 45,000 words about him. Kind of like how I thought clapping for frontline workers was stupid, so now I do it every night, and still do. And if you don't, you're a bad person.
This was very much a divide and conquer round for us based on Ethan's travel schedule and my just general Benjamin-ness, I guess, with being back in school.
I am now in Canada, but up until today I was not. I spent the round in Miami for a friend's bachelor party, which was not like your typical bachelor party of just drink. It was a lot of really fun stuff. I would highly recommend to anyone who visits Miami. First off, unfortunately, it's, I know the U.S. altogether is very far for Australians, and Miami is farther than most things, but great city to visit, as I have said before. The Caribbean capital of the U.S. Our adventures included a walking food tour of Little Havana, just a bunch of really good restaurants, and the Argentina versus Peru game, which was incredible atmosphere.
No, Messi did not play. Yes, Lautaro Martinez delivered.
I have never been an Argentina fan, but I was so impressed just with the environment. I saw them play in 2016, and that was a crowd of like a lot of Silicon Valley types that just happened to have a Messi jersey. This was a legit Argentina crowd, and I'd say it was about an 80-20 split. Peru fans showed out pretty well too, but I totally get it. This was awesome. It did, of course, cut into my footy watching time, and I am still catching up on some of that. Hence why things like the polished turd have not been completed for the round yet.
That'll all be done before the next round begins, but how about we just start recapping round 16?
I wanted to actually start with, I got to do a little bit of introducing people to footy. First off, unfortunately, despite wearing the shirt, nobody at the game commented on it, as in the Two Icons, One Legacy Lionel Messi shirt. I was thinking there would be at least one somewhere who got it, but probably didn't help that instead of finding a random Australian here or there, like a random South guy, a lot of the crowd was actually from South America, which, again, terrific atmosphere, but did not help with people understanding my shirt. But when people watched a bit of it was mostly the Suns game, the Suns Pies game that I was able to show to the other members of the group. And it got the same sort of reaction that I get out of most people, kind of just like a lot of confusion, but amazement. And it got one of my favorite quotes I've ever had referring to footy. They have 18 motherfuckers on that field? So that was certainly a highlight to me.
Now, one of the only games that we actually watched at the same time, we both actually watched as it occurred live, was the Friday nighter. Brisbane Lions 11-20-86, defeating Melbourne 11-15-81. For the second week in a row, the Demons did not score a goal in the fourth quarter, and this time it came back to bite them, despite Brisbane kicking 3 goals 7 in the first and 3 goals 6 in each of the third and the fourth. They got over the line thanks to a Hugh McCluggage goal from the boundary with 71 seconds left. Now, that came after what I think was a well-adjudicated, delivered out-of-bounds call with Alex Neil-Bullen basically making an origin move to score a try. Wrong code, and hell of a conversion. When Hugh McCluggage is kicking those sorts of goals, it's going to be a pretty good night for Brisbane.
I went back and was thinking about it this afternoon. You know, in real time, it was like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation where Neil-Bullen, like, I don't think there was really a way he could have gotten out of things with making it look convincing, getting any sort of call his way. Compound that by that it was like a 1-on-2 and he had to react so quickly. Like, there was no way he was going to be able to dispose of that properly. But I thought about it more today, and I think the best solution that he could have possibly had would have been to literally just handball it or kick it, probably handball just with the lack of space he had and time to release, right at one of the couple of Brisbane players that were right in front of him. That way, either that player catches it and then he, tackles them immediately for a ball up, or they're like caught off guard and it drops to the ground. And then the best case scenario would have been for it to lead to a stoppage and a series of ball ups, because that was really how Melbourne had a chance to get out of that. Or I guess maybe if somehow you're able to get him to if you handballed it off of the guy's leg and then they inadvertently kicked it out. But he was in a tough spot. Despite the outcome and ending, I actually really liked how the Demons played. And I will go as far as to say that over their last 6 games, this was easily their best performance other than the win over the Saints, which, a little bit of a different competition, playing the Lions at the Gabba and playing the Saints.
Jack Viney kept up his contested work from 6 days prior against North. His efficiency wasn't great, but the pure contest wins made him really valuable. He got goal side position against Jared Berry at stoppages to the point that Brisbane ended up dropping that tag in the middle of the second quarter. The focus went a bit more to Clayton Oliver after that, but Oliver himself had a much needed return to form. And Melbourne looked very solid in the first half and really almost through the end of this game because of their success from stoppage. Another thing I really liked was Bailey Fritsch being a lot more active. He had more of a defensive job, sticking with Harris Andrews one-on-one, and I hadn't quite seen that from him. He had been someone who D's fans and third parties alike had been pointing out as just not being very involved, being kind of lazy over the past couple weeks. I think someone really got into him there. I said in the beginning with this matchup, you'd have to neutralize Harris Andrews and Jack Payne in order to have a chance to win this game. Well, Payne was laid out with foot soreness. We'll see what the deal is long-term there. But right. Andrews was limited. And in terms of actual defensive work, I got to commend Ryan Lester for continuing his good form. And I think it was really highlighted with some of his marking.
Started a little slow and then really got it together. Dara Joyce was the one playing in Payne's place, and I didn't think he was very good. I don't know if you have any young options available.
It's incredibly tough considering the injury toll the Lions have already had this year, and you want to keep Froggy just kind of doing what's worked for him, and it was to the tune of 12 intercepts and 7 marks, as well as 5 score launches from 19 disposals. He was the most important mover out of defense, and that's something that hasn't been a super sure thing for Brisbane other than times where Dane Zorko's managed to go back and do more of a sweeping job. He got a lot of the ball in this game, but my attention went to the lesser quantity, but greater impact per touch that Leicester had.
First game back for Will Ashcroft, he looked very smooth and got quickly involved. Hopefully, it was also just coincidentally a down game for Kyle Oman, because if you have both of those guys clicking, that would be a terrifying proposition. Again, it's tough if you're Melbourne and you realize you just played your best game in a month and don't get anything to show for it. You were talking about Jack Viney. I think they've got to figure out a way for him to be cleaner with the ball, because the clearances have been incredibly important, but he hasn't been efficient at all. And really, it just hasn't turned into like a successful sequence at any point. I don't know if it's that he needs to look for shorter deliveries or what it is, but then you can get some really good possession change and start to kind of dominate territorially more.
When the Lions got the game on their terms, it was from getting back to some clearance success. Josh Dunkley, clearly their best on that front and in general. He had, I guess, what you could call a triple-double with 12 marks and octopus, that, of course, being 10 tackles and 10 score involvements, not to mention the 7 clearances. Lockie Neal, got his good quantity of touches, but he didn't have as much stoppage impact, I think, because of Viney somewhat. And so they need somebody else to step up, and that was Dunkley.
I thought start to finish, Josh Dunkley was really the one individual for the Lions that played like a complete 4 quarters. I thought he was terrific. Getting into contests, he was efficient, he was clean. He was just everywhere all night long. And, I think this was a game where the high-end individual talent beat out the overall team, and Dunkley did that. And that's one of the reasons you have guys like him. As quiet as his start to the season was, he is a guy who can absolutely move the needle individually much more than most. Like, look, nobody in this sport is truly going to be able to win a game by themselves. That's just not the way this sport functions. But he's one of the guys who's pretty close to it.
I think the Lions actually have the more sound strategy in terms of both 50s. So 4 of their 7 goals in the second half were off chains that started in the defensive half of the oval, and 7 of their 11 goals overall. So the movement was sound, Leicester starting that. And then up forward, they did an exceptional job preventing intercept marks from Stephen May and Jake Lever with the man defense they played. I went back and saw what Michael Whiting wrote, and he noted how Eric Hipwood had that sort of impact. It was more of a grimy game from Hipwood. He's not one to usually get super into things on the ground and be active below his knees, but he was in this game and more than played his part in occupying Melbourne's 2 perennial All-Australian contender defenders.
You talked earlier about quality versus quantity. I think that was kind of in reference to Ryan Lester. Eric Hipwood, another great example of this, only 15 touches and 1 goal, but 2 assists and 11 score involvements. And that's such a huge development because I haven't seen too many games like this for him. It's either a game where he's kicking multiple goals to be heavily involved or you barely notice him. For him to find a way to heavily involve himself in this game without putting up multiple goals is huge for just like a development standpoint and for making himself a more and more useful player. Also, I didn't really think about it until after the game and looking at stats and stuff. Oscar McInerney, while he only had 8 disposals, limited Max Gawn to 9. He held serve, and when you're facing Max Gawn, if you can just somewhat neutralize him, you've done your job. Like, I can't think, and I'd have to do some research for this, but I can't think there are too many games Max Gawn has ever played where an opposing ruckman has not just like racked up significantly more disposals than him or something, but like earned a Brownlow vote. Neither of them will be in the conversation for that in this game, but just taking Gawn out of that conversation was significant. So credit to Oscar McInerney on a night where he probably he wasn't noticed a ton, but he did his part. The young guys for Melbourne made a good impression. I thought Taj Woewodin actually getting to play a full game looked pretty sharp. And Andy Moniz Wakefield on debut, pretty clean kick out of the back. 16 disposals for Moniz Wakefield in his very first appearance. And then Woewodin with 11 and just did a decent job at his one-on-ones for a team that's, we've said so many times, like the top talent is great, but like what's that next stage? Having more guys that can fit into that conversation is huge. And it helps you avoid, where you're just kind of shuffling mediocre deck chairs, like the Weeda Brown situation.
You refer back to Weeda Brown a lot, like perhaps almost unhealthily so.
But I think it was like indicative of one of this team's problems in the last couple of years.
Moniz Wakefield provides some list flexibility as well because He came in when Christian Salem was out with a knee injury, and also Blake Howes was taken out of the side as well. Now, Howes is a pretty versatile player who can go from fullback to the wing, and there have been thoughts of pushing Salem into the middle when healthy with some more time there, along with guys like Trent Rivers. If you have steadier, newer pieces in the back like Modus Wakefield, then you can open up some of the veteran players to different roles. Also, the good times for the Brisbane Lions continue because they've just dealt with a couple big contracts. Charlie Cameron signed on until 2028 and Jared Berry until 2029. And remember, Hugh McCluggage is signed through 31, and Hipwood's been locked up too.
This has been like the season of, and there was another example of this later in this week, of like guys being rumored to be on the move and have all these suitors, and then they just end up signing a long-term deal and staying. One last thing about this game, did we even mention Clayton Oliver?
I did, yes.
Okay, because yeah, that's the biggest reason I think this game seems like a net positive for the D's, even without the 4 points. Like, it's such a weird position to be in right now with points altogether, where it's so tightly packed that on one hand, every game feels like life or death, and 1 minute you're in 5th and the next you're in 11th. But on the other hand, you go and win the very next week, and it's like, oh, all right, we're right back where we needed to be.
And they should have absolutely no problems winning next week.
It would be so funny if they didn't. But I expected them to lose this game by 5 goals. So I come away from this game with very positive opinions of their performance, 4 points or not. North Melbourne 9-6-60, defeated by the Western Bulldogs 11-11-77. This game was kind of decided on, Thursday, when we found out George Wardlaw got concussed at training. He had been on a roll. Takes him out of not only, obviously, that game, but the 12-day period he will miss this coming week's game against the Gold Coast Suns. So maybe the Suns could actually win a game at anywhere outside of a home site. And this one's at Dimma's favorite, Marvel.
Mate, I hate coming here.
But it's just, the moment you take him out, you realize, like, look, this was going to be a challenge to begin with when you have Bont, Libba, and Richards doing their thing in the middle.
You didn't even mention Adam Treloar, and Will Phillips actually went to him. Now, I called this. I was thinking when I made the call that it would be more because of Bontempelli's back spasms. At this point, does he just need to have a minor to moderate medical ailment every week? It ended up being a mistake not to tag him or to at least switch to him mid-game. And just imagine if even one of his kicks was straight as well, because the impact that he had with his 35 touches is, well, what you'd expect from Bont. It's no surprise to see him cook. It's like the least surprising of any single player in the league, despite what people will say about Nick Dacos. Also, with Adam Treloar in turn playing on Luke Davies' Uniac, it wasn't quite a Sentag Pete, but there was a sort of domino effect there that could be like Sentag Pete adjacent. Led to some confusion at stoppages where some Dogs midfielders got open. Treloar was the beneficiary of that sometimes, and it ended up being a team issue.
Yeah, I don't think Treloar would have been my choice to tag. It's tough because I think Bont is kind of like, I don't know if I'd quite call him untaggable, but it's not going to really wipe him out, that's for sure.
Again, the reason I called it was because of the medical report.
The reason I wouldn't do Treloar is I would probably just resort towards keep my fingers crossed that Treloar is going to have a down game and just turn it over a bunch. And after watching the first quarter, you know who I think I probably would have done it on? Would have actually been Ed Richards, who I have been so high on his performances this year. His kicking accuracy, it's always these like quick, low spearing balls. I just really enjoy watching him play.
Ow, quick, low spearing balls.
You make a point there. For only scoring 77, which was in part because they didn't really do much in the fourth. It was a 4-goal first quarter and 5-goal third quarter for the Dogs. But you got contributions from tall and small forwards. Aaron Naughton with 2, Jamara with 2, and Sam Darcy with 1, I think is like perfect for them, because the perception is normally it's like someone can go off for 4, but then someone else is like completely non-existent. This was kind of all hands on deck, which, I mean, how many times have we seen that from them?
We haven't seen it much at all. Granted, you could say it happened against North, but this momentum could carry into other games. And Cody Waitman looked just fine. Another 3 goals for him. So 3 in each of his 2 games back from injury. And he was their really only effective mark inside 50. Naughton didn't have great hands. Jamara didn't have, I think, any marks inside 50.
He didn't have any marks, period.
And that was an issue that some pointed out. Defensively for North, it was really up and down other than the obvious and Charlie Coleman. I noticed kind of the crests and troughs really hit Aiden Core in this game. A poor start against Naughton, recovered a bit into the second half, and then gave up an idiotic off-the-ball push free kick to Cody Waitman right in front of the umpire.
Right in front of me!
After North had just kicked 2 in a row, may have had a little bit of momentum. So that was a real sort of coach killer moment there.
Bit of a step back for Callan Dawson and Jackson Archer in this game. I'm not concerned about either of them. I like what they've shown all together, something you can live with and something that you should just expect to have happen with younger guys. Like, this is the sort of youth and learning moments and stuff that if you're North, you can live with. Also, Paul Curtis didn't do much in his milestone game last week. Got 2 goals off 14 touches. The crowd is starting to get into his goal song, which I love.
He is also a forceful tackler, and that was on display early. I think other people are starting to realize just what kind of a spark player he can be, and it's really fun watching him start to find a bit of a groove. Some other puzzling things for North. Zach Fisher got a knock to the leg and was subbed out like right away in the third quarter. The club called it tactical despite him being their possession leader at that point with 22. Now, he's been key as their halfback distributor since Harry Sheasel went forward. And in fact, when Fisher went out, Sheasel ended up moving to the back and, looked composed there as we know he could. But I feel like Fisher's a really important cog all of a sudden. And it just felt strange for the club to very clearly say, no, this is tactical. The other win for North, I would say, would be, Tristan Cherry against Tim English. Just another example of Cherry taking on another one of the higher tier rucks, you would say. Another one Cherry can knock off as saying, yeah, I beat him. I outplayed him, and you're going to need to keep watch of him. Oh, wait a minute. You talked about all these talls for the Bulldogs. Naughton, Ugle-Hagen, Darcy, they all contributed. What about Rory Lobb?
Yeah, he got some defensive work, ended up with 8 marks, did really well in his one-on-ones. This was one of the rare games where we saw all of the Dogs' talls as positive impacts.
His marking has never been questioned, so it was cool seeing him have a different assignment and really take that on and embrace it. They've talked about moving Sam Darcy in the back, and he can flex pretty well.
More than a marking thing, it's a positioning thing and a don't give away freeze thing.
Well, Lobb looks like more of an answer there than, Naughton for sure. The days of speculating whether Naughton would move to center halfback is over. Lobb was key, and so was Liam Jones, limiting Nick Larkey to 5 touches and no scores. That was outstanding.
Still, everything ties back into Wardlaw's absence. Nobody in the midfield could stick a tackle without him. I would have tried just sticking Sheasel into the middle and seeing what he could have done.
I expected more physicality out of maybe Tom Powell, but he wasn't able to carry enough of the load there. So maybe some extra support from Sheasel going in there at times might be the solution. Some more center bounce attendances for him.
While it wasn't their most remarkable margin of victory, they were up 5 goals at 3/4 time. This game impressed me from the Bulldogs just because it was like everyone actually got involved. It wasn't just getting carried by high-end talent as much as Bontempelli could have done that.
The siren is sounded at the SCG. Logan McDonald knows that he has as much time as he wants to make this kick. I hear rumblings from the West. I hear guitars. Sydney Swans 14-14-98 defeated by 15-9-99. McDonald overkicked it, and for the second time in as many years, and after the siren chants for the Swans at home goes wanting. what a return fixture this was for the Dockers. You think about how they just couldn't kick accurately in the game they played earlier in the year, and that was right after Cam McCarthy's death, where otherwise they had played, a decent game, just didn't get the scoreboard reward for it. They did in this game. 15 goals, 9. It was good work from Tall and Small. It was a very complete victory, and it was a strategically strong one as well. They looked to move the ball quickly from the beginning. They kept things in motion. Yeah, they were more turnover prone at the start, but established their footing in the game and pushed play considerably wider in the second half, and that made it tough for all the Swans to respond. And then the defense more than held up. Luke Ryan had a lot more responsibility in terms of one-on-one defense with Alex Pierce out. He handled that. Corey Wagner accelerated play with his run and kick. And Josh Draper with a massive fourth quarter defensively. I'm surprised he was not selected for the Rising Star nominee. That was, in fact, and then going back into the middle, have we found a new potential role for Nat Fife as more of a neutralizer there? Because he limited Isaac Heaney's impact substantially at bounces. It wasn't a full tag, but it was enough interference there that Fremantle had the upper hand in the middle of the whole way. And you combine that with Errol Goulden being kept in check by Jager O'Meara, and you see how Justin Longmuir approached these matchups the right way. I am so impressed by how Freo attacked this game, and I still would have been impressed by it had they lost.
I realized the way this game ended is a scenario that I don't know if it can really occur much in any other sport, where 3 outcomes are simultaneously on the table on one play. Both teams had a chance to win, and a tie was possible. Now, this can only happen in sports where you can score in different numbers, for lack of a better word. So,
the closest thing I can think of is an American football untimed down by 6 situation, but then that would force overtime.
It has to be something where, again, ties have to exist. So, it can't be, basketball, a guy shooting 3 free throws with his team down 2. Also, that's not really one play. The only scenario I could think of, and this is super niche and super rare, a team is trying to kick a field goal on the final play of NFL overtime to play for a tie, and then there's the tiny possibility of faking it and going for the win. That is the only other scenario where all 3 outcomes are on the table in one play that I can think of.
It doesn't have to be NFL. I'm thinking about Michigan State pulling off a fake field goal for the win against Notre Dame.
I was thinking about that, but the tie isn't an outcome. It would just be an extension of the game.
I guess, yeah, but just that play stands out to me.
Yes, that's the play I was thinking of, but it has to be in a context where the game could just end in a tie. So I hope that the sound guy was sitting there with all 3 songs ready to go.
We're waiting for the day a PA operator actually plays "It's a Draw" at an AFL Oval. I wonder if it happens in a USAFL contest, if Barish is just sitting there waiting to blast "It's a Draw" to the masses. I hope he is.
There are 2 clubs that I could actually see do it. I can see the Giants do it. I can see the Suns do it. Am I crazy to think that would totally be something the Suns would do?
The Suns are trying to be cool like the Giants now.
Or even better, the Suns trumpeter plays it.
Now that is next level. Back in round 9, the Dockers were minus 38 in terms of actual score compared to expected score. They were plus 24 on Saturday. They hit some more difficult shots. Jai Amos back in form. At ground level, they kept the pressure. There were a number of close quarter situations where they won out, and the whole team really upped their physicality. I saw Bailey Banfield doing that in particular. I was really pleased with that because the one aspect of his game that I thought had been missing a bit was some of that physical pressure. Now, the Swans did repeatedly get goals in response. They kept getting the margin back to 20 points, but they couldn't get closer than that from the final minute of the first quarter all the way until late in the third. And they came charging home, 3 goals, 3 in the fourth, and just couldn't close it. But I don't think a loss is all that hurtful at this rate. Yes, it does make things a bit tighter. They still are, of course, a game clear
and way clear on percentage.
And after a loss, I think there's just definitely a morale shift in terms of the end of the streak. but I think more of an urgency to focus on the shortcomings, including how many times they let teams get out to excellent first quarters. They've lost, I think, 5 of their last 6 first quarters, including on Saturday when they gave up 44 points in the opening term.
To a team that's a notoriously bad first quarter team, as much as the Dockers have shed that a bit lately. Like, it's one thing to be trailing at quarter time. It's another to be giving up like 6, 7 goals. I will maintain that this is what the Swans needed. They were due to lose at some point. You'd rather just lose than lose in that fashion. You know, a normal like 2-goal loss would be a lot easier to stomach than one that ended in that fashion. But I would be more concerned about this team's chances to win a flag if they like went into finals at 22-1. I think they have one more loss in them. I think at 20-3 they get, or maybe even 19-4. I think 20-3 is their most likely record. And then they head into finals and things should be pretty good.
I want to remind people again of the quote that Justin Longmuir gave the Thursday before their game against the Suns, coming off their complete disappointment against the Bulldogs. There's no doubt in the seniors on the weekend that the guys were worried more about how many possessions they got and how they competed in the contest, how they pressured the opposition, and how they defended. Competed in the contest, they won that. O'Meara limiting Golden for the better part of 3 quarters, Fife on Heaney, Caleb Sarong grinding things out in the middle with some good support as well. How they pressured the opposition, that was present the whole way. I mentioned Banfield's physicality being a clear example, and how they defended. No Alex Pierce, surprisingly no problem.
Well, I had said that matchup-wise, it would be less impactful in this game than in others.
Still, Hayden McLean had, one of his best games in the air with some clear contested wins, and that was a worry with how quickly he had started, but he was paid more attention in the second half, and the strategy was, fluid enough throughout that they went to the hotter hands when necessary. It was a more magnified man role for Hugh Davies, and there were definitely some shortcomings there, but they made up for it. And Josh Draper was a big reason why, especially late.
In terms of Frio handling pressure, did they kind of just do that the way I thought they could match up well to win this game?
As in?
Their defensive unit being able to withstand what Sydney's able to do that creates chaos and turnovers and problems for so many other teams?
I think that was part of it. I think also the Swans had a fair amount of unforced errors. You saw that in the second quarter and permeating some things throughout the second half as well, with the inability to get some marks and maybe some less optimal positioning, but that's also a credit to the Dockers there through the air. And I think the Swans were a bit too reliant on the air once they saw McLean had gotten off to his start, and maybe they could have done a bit more with the ground game. But despite down games from the big three in their midfield, Heaney, Warner, Golden, that the Swans nearly did come back to win this game is an encouraging sign in itself. And I think both teams have a lot of positives that they can take out of this game, obviously for Frio, and upon investigation, some clear ones for the Swans as they go into another important stretch.
Gold Coast 14-7-101, defeating Collingwood 13-12-90. The home Suns, they did it again.
The mighty home Suns.
The mighty Sun.
In front of 23,000 plus, the third highest crowd for the venue, all of the top 4 attendances in the history of People First Stadium have been against Collingwood, just with this whole winter holiday thing going on. I really think that next year, if Collingwood are talking about setting up a hub on the Gold Coast, I think they might have their home game, maybe round 17. Play Gold Coast in round 16 again, like they've been doing for a couple of years now, and then stay up there for another week.
As much as I would love for it to really be a true Suns crowd,
yeah, right.
Anything that continues to drum up interest in the region is good, and this has definitely helped achieve that.
The Suns' handball game was strong from the start. They had a deeper midfield with Sam Flanders not being stupid and going in the middle right away. That extra support there for an already strong triumvirate means a lot. And it was one of Noah Anderson's most active and best games. Clearly the best out of that midfield crop. And overall outdid even Nick Dacos, I would say. Even with Dacos not being tagged, the lack of attack actually looked good for about 2.5 quarters, and then he got some ascendancy late. A brilliant passage that ended up being one of the Goal of the Week nominees, and honestly will probably win it and be a Goal of the Year finalist.
I thought it was good. I didn't think it was amazing. After going back
Nick DeCosta, they'll vote.
After going back and watching again, I have takes on this that we'll get to at the end of the show.
The Nick DeCosta Jordan DeGoey combo came home very strongly, just not enough, as the Pies looked like they were going to storm home and do their typical Collingwood thing, kicking 6 goals in a row to take the lead with 4:27 left. Nathan Kruger doing it. You got to think, oh man, it's cardiac Collingwood again. And then it was the Bands, Long and Ainsworth, to close out the game. And I think Ainsworth is a player that deserves a lot more love than he gets. You see how things can move smoothly through the middle when that typical midfield trio plus Flanders now is really on. We've seen the wing play grow, especially from Sam Closey, who signed on for a couple more years now. I think Ainsworth is often that link player to the outside as they're going at a faster pace, and then can get into some pocket spots and be a decent finisher as well. This was one of the more visible games, I think, for Ainsworth, and it's about damn time that he's given the credit that he's due.
It seems like it's just a matter of consistency for him. Like I can't think of too many occasions where the Suns have had a good game and he hasn't, and even fewer where he's had a good game and the team hasn't.
Is he their barometer?
This year, the Suns are 4-0 when he's kicked multiple goals. They are 2-4 when he's kicked 1 goal, and 2-3 when he's gone goalless. Yeah, you get 2 goals out of Ben Ainsworth, you're probably going to win.
Is this like a Gary Rowan sort of situation here, or I think actually
it's been over a long enough time frame to be able to pull that off.
The real answer, actually, until Friday, I'm surprised we haven't mentioned this, was Kazi Pickett, because we never even mentioned that Kazi kicked 5 and was among Melbourne's best, just being his typical Kazi self. I think I made that sort of main character prediction a week too late, but that was the first time in his career that Kazi had kicked, I think, 3 or more goals and lost. So there's that. So much of this middle Saturday game, though, on the Gold Coast depended on transitions with handballing, because Gold Coast were able to carve through things when they had the numbers. But that commitment to the surge meant they could get really exposed when Collingwood got possession, when something came unstuck, because the Pies were cleanest on their own transitions. There were multiple times of very vacant 50s, if not goal squares. It's something that I imagine Damien Hardwick will work to tidy up.
I'm just so impressed that the Suns won this game after yielding like the very typical Collingwood comeback. I mean, what about it wasn't a typical Collingwood comeback?
The fact that they lost it?
No, but in the stuff leading up to it.
It did seem pretty damn typical in a lot of respects, just with the star players taking hold. Less out of Scott Pendlebury maybe in his first game back. The most heat, though, on any Collingwood player this week is on Darcy Moore, who was just not cutting into defense. He's been regularly beaten, and his best skill at this point is getting his knee into players' backs and ribs.
I will say Moore and Quainer haven't had quite as many games this year where they've really dominated. I think that was a pretty constant theme in both the 22 and 23 seasons.
And when you also have just some pesty forwards who can pull those sorts of annoyance jobs in any sort of contest like Ben Long has been able to do, it makes it even more difficult. Again, I am so impressed by how the two Bens have looked for Gold Coast. When they've been going, the rest of the team's been going with them, and I want them to be able to actually do it on the road. Now, some casualties coming out of this game. Jared Witz suffered a vertebral fracture. That's significant. Well, at least Ned Moyle is signed on.
I mean, that's a bad injury at any position, but for a ruckman, I wouldn't blame him at all if that's something that holds him out for a pretty significant window. This seems like one of those injuries, though, where it sounds awful, and then he's back out there way quicker than you'd expect.
Well, that was that Darcy Moore collision, another massive injury. Well, I wouldn't say actually massive. It says a 2-week timeline. That seems incredibly small. And then for Collingwood, I should note that John Noble went down for a head injury assessment late. He was indeed concussed, so he'll be missing this coming week as they have their rematch with Essendon.
I did not see post-game stuff because other games were coming up right away, but it sounded like Craig McRae was actually pretty frustrated with his team's performance.
His whole thing is, we shouldn't have to make all these crazy comebacks. We've got the talent to outrun and outplay teams, and we're not doing it. That's reasonable frustration.
How many lineup changes do they make this coming week? I mean, I would think injuries are going to necessitate at least one or two, but is that all?
Well, they'll have to make up for Noble, so that's one automatically. And you've got to keep Billy Frampton in the back as some greater support for Moore. They had him forward for part of the game, and that was where Moore was a bit more exposed. So maybe there's a gap there where you can bring in another tall option there. I think there's, Charlie Dean was omitted in defense. That's another option. Lockie Schultz was out from illness. Now, I'd like Joe Richards being in as the sub. I'm a believer in Richards at this point, but I'd imagine you'd get Schultz in. And in order to make up for Noble, maybe that's how Tao Jaff gets another opportunity. And hopefully he can stay in as we look toward the Joth Joust in a couple rounds. And we can add another Collingwood injury into that soleus injury for Beau McCreary. That's 6 weeks for a man that makes winning plays.
Benjamin, 78% of our listeners are between 18 and 35 years old, so they probably want to start a podcast like we did.
How did you know that number, Ethan?
Thanks to the analytics we have for Spotify for Podcasters.
Formerly known as Anchor, sorry Frio fans, Spotify for Podcasters has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phone or your computer. No fancy software needed.
It's so easy you can edit it while drunk.
And Spotify for Podcasters doesn't just allow you to upload to Spotify, you can also distribute your podcast on platforms like Apple, Stitcher, and more, just like we do.
Best of all, it's completely free.
Not only is it free, you can even make money from listener support or ad revenue. Hint, hint.
Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to podcasters.spotify.com to get started today.
You know the drill. We're on Twitter at Americans Footy, YouTube, Instagram, etc. I am at Castle Media.
I am at Benjamin HK01, and my nephew, his son, is at cat named Brian, and he is safe and sound after having been cat sat for the first time.
I don't think he had a tremendous time, but I think he got through it.
It was enough.
We had not only 5 games on Saturday, but, the windows with games starting at the exact same time. So another game that I have yet to really dig into at all. Adelaide 13-16-94, defeating GWS 12-6-78. I had said all along Adelaide was going to have that where the hell was this all along game. And I said that it was going to happen against Greater Western Sydney. I just said the greater and western parts very quietly, and you didn't hear them.
And you also said that Frio would respond against the Swans. So between that and the Suns winning, how many of those did you tip? Because you were high on all 3 of those things.
None of them. I knew all were possible, and I still just wouldn't have given any more than like a 50% chance of actually happening.
And yet they all did.
If you told me that at least one of them had happened, I would have said, yeah, that makes sense. Even for a second one to happen, all right. But for all 3 is puzzling.
Well, I think this was another Giants drop-off after a quick start, just like Sydney Derby. And their defensive struggles without Sam Taylor persisted. And I find that still a little bit surprising with how they've been able to cope in years past. I know that Harry Hillberg was given mixed reviews, and definitely he was active. I actually thought of him as a bit more of a negative with venturing away from the right areas at times. Ben Keys was able to limit him pretty severely in the first half. And then even though the numbers were there at stoppage for Tom Green, even though Lachie Whitfield accumulated from the back, the Giants took short looks but suboptimal ones, usually by hand, and they were trying to force the tsunami when it wasn't the right moment. This is a time where I'm actually agreeing with Jared Healy about falsely manufacturing the tsunami, I believe is the direct quote that he said. They tried to push the pace too much for their own good. It led to some sloppiness with the ball and some rebounds on which the Crows wholeheartedly pounced. And it wasn't as if they really needed help in the first place. Isaac Ragan was explosive off of clearances, especially in the forward third. And to add on to the struggles for the Giants in defense, they kept Lecker from using his height. They kept him more occupied on the ground. And in the second quarter alone, from 6 contested marks inside 50, Adelaide kicked 5-1. They had a 7-goal second quarter in which they nearly outscored themselves for the rest of the game. It wasn't all good for the Crows, but it was, most definitely crusty seal of approval. It was good enough. Had Josh Rochelle been able to convert on a couple of his other kicks, I think he would have been regarded as one of the best on the ground. I talked about Keys' limiting job already. And also I want to give credit to Mitchell Hinge for being a really solid defender.
The Giants haven't scored more than 80 in a game since round 7 when they poured it on the Lions in Canberra, which is just kind of hard to believe with the amount of offensive talent. I mean, Jesse Hogan's had such a good year.
A bit of a cooling off in the past couple, and there's no real clear other solution there yet. You had another game in for Max Grzeski, but with Aaron Cadman lighting it up in the twos again, you can see that switch being made again. There needs to be a more consistent kind of secondary thing there going on. Hogan and then some combination of Riccardi and blank, and I think the blank is going to be Cadman right now.
Other than one really good goal against Geelong, I mean, I see numbers-wise Toby Green had 3 goals and 2 assists, but how did he actually perform?
Well, that was the highest profile one-on-one there, I would say, with Max Michelani. Green took advantage off a couple of those, and another one of his goals came straight off a clearance of really clean Kieran Briggs tap. Briggs was definitely the cleaner of the rucks in this game, and that's really no surprise. Now, when the Crows were going well, Riley O'Brien went well in the second quarter, but by and large, it was a better game for Briggs. Honestly, my focus wasn't much on Toby Green this game or the Giants' offensive output at all. It was more about their failures to get better passages as a whole, whereas you kind of see the opposite there in Fremantle being willing to move at a faster pace and change angles, reading the defense really well on the fly. The Giants tried to force their opponents into bad spots, and in doing so, really fucked themselves over.
So this is interesting. Of the 12 goals the Giants kicked, they recorded assists on 10 of them. And you'd think all right, Tsunami, good things. Let's see. The Crows were more than 11% more efficient inside 50. Unsurprisingly, GWS more handballs. Is this a game that when I go back and actually watch it, it's going to oh, I see how that happened? Is that what it's going to be like?
I think it's going to be that, yeah, especially in the extremely telling second quarter, where it ended up really being a perfect storm. Well, not for the Giants, that is. You could have gone for some really easy Tsunami puns there, and I didn't.
Lockie Murphy seems to be not popular among Crows fans.
This is absolutely nothing new.
What's the deal there?
Not an AFL caliber forward. Ends up being really frequently in one-on-ones, and the thought is that he's also being played out of position. I would hope that Zach Taylor gets a full run. He was the sub on debut in for Braden Cook. Yeah, we had, 5 debuts this round, and 2 of them were subs. And also Kynan Brown was a late back in as the sub again.
Oh, that was something we didn't talk about earlier. As it's funny because that's the game we probably are going to end up having talked the most about this round. Also just because it's one of the games that we've both watched in full. Kynan Brown, once again, what does he have to do to get more time? Why is Simon Goodwin resistant to giving a sub more run? I get that you don't want to pull the plug too early and then someone gets hurt, but he could definitely do it earlier in the fourth quarter.
Especially once Kynan's already proven himself.
And it's another situation where it's we're protecting a lead. Let's get a guy in there to go lay a big tackle. How concerned are you, or how concerned should I be as well, on the endangered species scale when it comes to GWS? Or in the words of South Park, when should we start to worry?
At this point, with this slide and the fixture, I'd put the Giants toward the threatened side of things. They've got the classic Blues double up this coming week, and I see so many must-win games otherwise. One that you wouldn't expect them to get at the Gabba. Toss-ups against Melbourne, Hawthorn, Freo, and the Bulldogs. At this point, you could easily see them losing both of those. It may really come down to Ballarat round 24. I think there's so much that's unsold about this team in terms of other distributors, other than Lockie Whitfield. How exactly Leclerc and the other defenders can play through some obstacles that forward line set, and just overall mitigating the loss of Sam Taylor, which I didn't think was as much of an issue last year. I don't know what exactly, it must have been the higher scoring rate that masked that.
If this was a Victorian team, they'd be catching a lot of shit right now.
You expected a sophomore slump in some ways under Kingsley as they got more predictable, but I don't think quite this slide was quite what we expected.
Especially after the way they started the season so hot.
Country game, night game, okay, and a rainy game, which means it should favor Geelong, and in the second half, it most certainly did. The Cats scoring 10 goals to 2 after the long break and winning by 45, 16-9, 105 to Essendon, 9-6-60. This was refreshing in some ways, especially with the concerns coming in with a different forward look, the lack of a true ruck again, and Sam de Koning being sent there again at the very start. A potential milestone lift for Jade Gresham and Dyson Heppel. And then the Cats just ran away with it in the second. Good debut for Lawson Humphreys. Ollie Dempsey, the clear Tom Wills Award winner.
I would not call it a good debut for Lawson Humphreys. I'd call it a great debut. And I'm wondering, why was he not in sooner? Because people who watched the VFL team closely have been saying he's been ready for a while. And his inclusion, and I loved him taking kick-ins because it added so much quickness and speed, and you would have these sequences where you'd get up to midfield really quickly because it would go like Humphreys, Guthrie, Holmes. That's like the perfect chain for me.
Humphreys, Guthrie, Holmes, and then you've got Brad Close potentially free to wreak some more havoc, or Myers being a next connection.
Second half, Myers was terrific. First half, not great. At halftime, I'm not sure if it was a message or just guys started playing better. I'm going to assume something was said at some point because really 3 guys turned it on in the third quarter. Ollie Dempsey was doing it from the start, but third quarter, Brian, Mitch Nevitt, and Mark Blitzobs. This was a very Mark Blitzobs game in that like he was valuable and impactful without having huge numbers anywhere. Believe it was 15 disposals, and I feel like the happy zone for Blitzobs is always like 15 to 17, right?
15 to 17, plus the ruck roll, plus the following of a key opposition player. It's just tackle.
I always feel like
you let the former steeplechaser be the former steeplechaser. Mark Blitzobs is a former steeplechaser.
But this, unlike the Richmond win, where it was just like, all right, we're better than they are. This was a well-earned victory where I really think there was a turning point. And there was a moment at the end of the game that really felt like a we're back moment. And that was the team making sure Mitch Nevitt got a late goal as a reward for his hard work. And it was a really nice goal, like from the right pocket with his right.
Welcome back, Mitch Nevitt. It's nice to get another Mitch in there and for 2 Mitches to be performing well. I know you put Mitch Duncan under the pump at the start from some early errors, and then, boy, to get things together. You have this knack of calling people out right before they get their shit together. And I'm starting to pick up on it as well. I'm managing it a bit too, but you are this...
The what does he even do? You've done it twice now.
Bailey J and then Rory Lobb, but the difference is you do it on a much more regular basis, obviously in particular with Geelong having called out Jack Henry once or twice. It ended up being that he was a pretty suitable matchup for Peter Wright.
First half, I thought it was awful. Second half, way better.
And then Duncan cleaning up things after the first, I'd say 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, really got his act together. I was concerned about this matchup despite the typical success against Essendon because I thought their physicality was usually lacking, and that was a point where we usually kind of ripped a game open. Managed to do that some second half still. Early on, certainly Sam Durham was really impactful, kind of lessened as the game went on.
I'd probably label Jai Caldwell as the best out of that center physical group for Essendon, and maybe their best overall.
It's a tough one. I've struggled with that between Peter Wright's first half, Durham, and Caldwell. Not only did he get, I think it was 12 clearances, he was able to fight through a lot of contact. Less than 60% disposal efficiency, but like on a degree of difficulty scale, I thought he was certainly a positive piece in a midfield that otherwise didn't particularly play well. Toby Conway's got a foot or ankle thing.
It's the one that's persisted and it's been flaring up again. So with that and Reece Stanley maybe having gone under as well, I think you're going to see this same sort of ruck look for a while. Maybe more of Jack Henry pinch hitting from time to time. I'd still like for Sam DeConing to stay back in defense. Well, yeah, speaking of defense, how about Tom Stewart getting in the 20s going into the middle?
I don't know if that's going to work full time. I think Essendon, between set shot issues and just not finishing marks in the forward 50, especially in the second half, could have probably had a couple more goals. Probably should have lost this game by more like 25 than 45. So I wouldn't get too complacent and say, yeah, that's it. We solved our defense. But I liked throwing Stewart in the middle on occasion. First off, it helped with clearances. Second, it's a way to shake a tag. I called Matt Guelphy being the guy on him. That seemed like a no-brainer.
I called that before you did. And I expected Jake Kelly to be on Tyson Stengel, and then Kelly was out sick. And I think his absence ended up being pretty apparent.
But yeah, Stewart rotating around worked. And I think that's another thing that I don't know if you can do without Lawson Humphreys, because Humphreys is one who's able to take kick-ins. A couple of other midfielders that I've been critical of, I thought played pretty well. Tom Atkins did a fine job against Zach Merritt, helped quiet him down. Jack Bowe's high possession numbers, I didn't think he was one of the best players out there. Champion Data has him as the best player in this game, and somehow has Ollie Dempsey down at 8th, which is insane. Ollie Dempsey was outstanding and was always able to break away from guys and get involved in some really good sequences, and kicked an awesome, like, sort of a back heel goal, I guess. But for Bowes to get 26 touches and 7 tackles, regardless of how important those touches were, that's significant. So both Bowes and Atkins did their thing. Solid game from Dangerfield. Brian, big second half. This looked a lot better. And then you mentioned Duncan. He's another one that I liked in some of those quick possession change where you saw some of his kicking like right along the boundary where like that's vintage Mitch Duncan.
And that's another thing that's helped by Humphreys being in there and Duncan maybe having a bit less responsibility further back. He was subbed down. I think that was mostly just some cramping there.
It looked like I was worried that maybe there was like a sternum situation or something, the way he was like being stretched, but he doesn't seem to be mentioned on the injury report at all. I think it's just like general soreness.
You labeled the other two Irishmen as sub candidates, and O'Sheen was left out, and Tui had an overall solid game. I know he was up pretty high in the votes.
Mullen seemed to get pretty good reviews in the VFL. I hope he gets more time down there.
He also cut his hair again.
I mean, I don't think there was a single bad performance. Shannon Neal, I think, had a bad miss at one point. Jai Clark was pretty quiet, so maybe that's one where it's like, you got to ask, is he going to be better by being in every week, or is he going to be better by getting down to the twos?
Clark's name came up when I was discussing potential omissions with the kind of form Sean Manna has had in the VFL. Absolutely lit up Sandringham for 6 goals. And I think the way that Manna can be accommodated is keeping Myers more in the middle because his handballs at stoppage are still underrated.
Also, a lot of people seem to think Gary Rowan and Ollie Henry kind of step on each other's toes, and Rowan having his best game without Henry in the lineup was not a coincidence. Ollie's good to go for this week, so we'll see how that gets managed. I don't know if maybe you just have Henry go like full forward and take out Shannon Neal, or how you would work that. Because it's tough, because I think right now both are definitely in your best 23, but it's like, how do you make it to benefit the overall team? Sam DeConing, we talked about him in the Rock a little. First half was not good. The hit-out numbers did not end up good at all. I think it was like, 59-27 or something. But second half, he didn't let them produce a bunch of hit-outs to advantage like they had early. Todd Goldstein had 13 for the game to advantage. Sam Draper had 6. Hit-outs to advantage were 19-5. But I liked the strategy they used in the second half, where they basically turned Todd Goldstein and Sam Draper into Dave Matthews.
Not his tour bus?
No. Sam DeConing just crashed into them a bunch.
You knew I had to say something about the tour bus.
I wasn't even thinking of that, but thank you.
I'm not sure if we've mentioned it, but I feel like this is something in the cultural lexicon outside the United States. This will actually be, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary this year in August 8th, 04. The tour bus dumped about 860 pounds of human waste through a bridge into the Chicago River and right onto a sightseeing boat that was sailing beneath.
My favorite part from the plaque that was erected to commemorate it was, nobody died that day, but many wish they did. But yeah, this was actually like a really good strategy where like if you don't really have a ruckman and you're not going to necessarily get hitouts off of it, it's just like make sure they can't hurt you with what they're doing. And when DeConey just started bowling into them, it significantly lessened the impact.
I mentioned Tyson Stengel briefly earlier because you could tell that Jake Kelly was absent, with the ability that Stengel had to get open, was the only 3-goal scorer in the game in the rough conditions, and the Cats locked him up for 5 years, about $700,000 per. And that's the other one that a big contract signing, despite all sorts of rumors of swirling rivals. Yeah, I wouldn't want to play for the Saints either as a small forward or a forward at all. I mean, small, you might just have your toes stepped on by Jack Haynes, because if there's anybody who's going to lift there in terms of the small play, in terms of goal and assist generation, he's usually been a highlight on the team. But this Sunday game that the Saints played, this may have been the worst game of the year. Either that or their game against the Suns 3 weeks prior. I mean, this was a pretty clear one to label as the Sickos game of the week, and it did not disappoint, ?
I only saw the very end of this game. So, fun fact, getting out of Hard Rock Stadium in Miami is impossible. Getting there is a pain in the ass. Getting out is even worse. It's in an area with no public transit, logjam freeways. The Argentina-Peru game ended a little before 10 p.m. We walked nearly 2 miles and then finally got a ride, actually got in a car at about, I think it was 11:40. Makes getting in and out of Levi's Stadium feel easy.
I think you saved yourself there from some... Well, actually, no, you didn't save yourself. We like the Sickos stuff.
I mean, I'm going to go back and watch this, and I feel like it would have been more fun to suffer through in real time. You know how normally you have like the footy world collectively coming to social media and saying this game's shit? Was this one of those?
This was, but it was made much more palatable by the elite broadcasting tandem of Anthony Hudson and Matt Hill.
What made this game so bad? I know you said, was it just like a lot of turnovers?
Yeah, we can start with that. St Kilda 8-12-60, defeated by Port Adelaide 8-14-62. Oh, the pressure is still on Ken Hinckley. He was pretty emotional after this game in his interview. I mean, he's not one to shy away from the criticism. He knows that he cops it as part of the job, and pretty well when it comes to the media side of things. Yeah, by skill level, though, this was just not a good game. All sorts of missed kicks and entries. I noted so many of them early on. Just the first 5 minutes alone had enough clangers for probably a half of footy, if not more. And it just kind of continued. Port dominated from clearances, especially center bounces in the first half, but they made far too little from that success. They just bombed it again and again and again. Now, the bombing strategy isn't that great to begin with, but they got a subpar forward line at this point. Ollie Lord put his body on the line and did a couple nice things. But between that and also having the combination of Cal Wilkie and Josh Battle back there, just bombing it is not a good strategy to begin with.
I mean, that's kind of what Ross Ball is meant to coerce you into doing, right?
Thing is, Port ought to be a team that can work through it. And we've seen them work through those sorts of things this year. And you had, in my opinion, the clear best player in this game, Jason Horne-Francis.
Here he is again, the horny one.
Lifting, especially in the third quarter. I noted during that 11 disposal turn for him, it felt like he was playing at 125% speed while everyone else was at 80. He was moving between contests to really good effect. Just followed play all over the oval. I noted a bunch of passages where he had 2-3 touches that led to actually decent looks. And let's see, 6 coaches, what the fuck?
Aside from, a perfect game, which I have decided that there are 3 types of perfect games in coaches' votes. Aside from a perfect game, this is my second favorite coaches' vote distribution ever. So a perfect game could be the 10-8-6-4-2, could be 10 different players getting votes, or could be a 6-6-6-6-6.
What about 6-5s?
That works too. But
So that's a fourth
game whose votes I prefer to this one was Geelong's win over North Melbourne last year. Another game that, like this one, had 9 vote recipients. In that one, though, they were all from Geelong, and the only player who appeared on both coaches' ballots was Tom Atkins, who both coaches agreed was the 3rd best. In this one, somebody had Horn Francis as best, and someone had him as 5th best. A couple other fun coaches' vote things out of this round. The 8-8-8-2-2-1-1 in the Suns Pies game, and then someone out of Jai Caldwell, Zach Toohey, and Max Holmes joined Zach Butters this week in the 5 votes from one coach, 0 from the other.
In terms of the arc of this game, from the beginning, I was disappointed by the umpiring. It was somewhat tilted the Saints' way with a couple bad free kicks and just a really soft one. I hate any of the giving the ball to the wrong person types of things. Again, this is a whole letter versus spirit of the law thing. And I think it was Ollie Wines getting the ball from Jordan Sweet instead of handing it to the umpire. That gave Rowan Marshall a goal. Marshall could be right up there, Rowan that is, as the Saints' best player in this game because once again, he was freed up to just do more with another ruckman in there. Tom Campbell was in again, another late in, and he was subbed out in the mid to late 3rd quarter, which I thought was maybe a tad early in most cases. In this game, it just had me wonder why Cooper Sharman wasn't in from the beginning. Max King has been struggling a lot as of late. He has not been able to get front position in marking contests, and the heat is most definitely on him. And when the Saints made their push, Sharman was definitely part of it with his forward 50 play, but it came too little too late. The last goal of the game was scored thanks to Sharman handing off to Jack Higgins with over 13 minutes left. That tied the scores at 59. The Saints had the first 8 inside 50s of the 4th, and then the game kind of screeched to a halt. Horn Francis and Zach Butters were able to work some things out and get Port some better looks. But I got to commend Alir and Brandon Zerk-Thatcher on the defensive side of things. Alir has been the saving grace a number of times for Port since he came over, and I think was very apparent in this one. And Zerk-Thatcher was perhaps the main reason why King was so quiet. You don't expect Brandon Zerk-Thatcher to get that sort of win is a thing. When you think of Zerk-Thatcher against Halls, you think of him getting humiliated by Tom Hawkins.
This just seems like a game that had an appropriate crowd of less than 20,000.
Similar to, the other Sickos game 3 weeks ago. And the Saints, when they did move well, I noted in the second quarter for one, they managed to get those overlaps like they did in the 4th quarter a couple weeks back against the Lions. You had Sinclair and Henry involved again. The addition of Desai Waganid-Milra obviously paid dividends, but it was a matter of finishing things. And when the teams combined to kick 16-26, I think that's telling. Port had the greater number of entries. They were plus 12 inside 50s. I want to say the right team won this game, but honestly, I feel like the right Sickos result would have been a draw. Having said that, I don't want any more draws this year. Draws are good in moderation. Any more draws this year, and I fear for extra time.
I was going to ask you who you felt should have won. Let's what's percent if you did the percentage here?
I think the deserve meter would have probably tipped, maybe around 2-1 for Port because they had the better individual players, in my opinion, the clear best on ground, even though obviously the coaches didn't agree with that. And they managed to close out the game with effective enough displays in the back 2/3 to at least hold on. I mean, this wasn't a game. This was actually a game about holding on because Ross Ball is just kind of holding on and hoping that the low number you scored was enough. Port still can't score. Todd Marshall's accuracy is not there. Rioli's still out was definitely damaging for them. Lord hasn't been able to be up to standard quite yet. They're going to need to have that midfield group score more, and I think the forward game from Connor Rosie and Ollie Wise might be what's required there. If Horn Francis and Butters can get those wins, the overlaps with the two of them can still be pretty devastating. I think Rosie's running ability might get overlooked because of how prominent Butters and Horn Francis have been as of late.
The way you described Ross ball, almost like cricket-like. It's like set a target and then try to fight the other team off. Is that fair?
Did India play Ross ball in the final?
No, they scored way too much to play Ross ball.
Should we just give Surya Kumar Yadav Mark of the Week?
Yes. I was embarrassed that didn't make the Sports Center top 10. Like, I thought Nicholas Purin's catch when we were recording a couple weeks ago was nuts. Yeah, this was way better.
The middle Sunday game, Richmond 10-10-70, defeated by Carlton 20-11-131. It was the debut for number 51, Jacob Blight. Our first number 51 on an AFL Oval in 8 years.
It was weird. Richmond hung in there for a half and then...
Exploding Cripps syndrome?
Yeah, 7-1 third quarter. Patrick Cripps drawing a ton of well-deserved praise for his performance lately. 14 clearances.
And this is against a Richmond team with Jacob Hopper back in?
A goal, 40 disposals, 3 assists, 14 clearances. And he's doing this while sharing the midfield with Sam Walsh, who recorded an octopus.
This was an interesting one where I've been looking at the mix between Patrick Cripps and the other midfielders and the forwards a bit for the Blues as well, because going into this year, I thought that Cripps could get some more forward time in general with Elijah Hollins coming into the mix. Instead, Hollins has been parked forward largely and has been a very effective player, big body, but seen by hand and by foot in terms of kicking for a goal in the forward 50. It's actually been quite the handy fantasy pickup for me now that I think about it. But I think Hollins being solid in the forward 50 is what allowed Michael Voss to say, you know what? We don't need to throw Patrick forward. Keep him in the middle. No need to fix something that's not broken by any means. You talk about players, they say sometimes commentators talk about players who are running on the top of the ground. This is the type of stuff that they mean by that with Cripps and Horn Francis from earlier in the day. And I guess at the same time,
Cripps, my favorite part of this, 80% disposal efficiency, even with 17 contested possessions.
Is that an indictment of Richmond's defense, or is it just more praise for Cripps?
I mean, it's probably both. I will say on a positive front for Richmond, Tobin and Curvis got the better of Mark Pittonet after Tom de Koning was laid out, which really surprised me, actually, because I thought matchup-wise, Pittonet would be just fine for this. It's hard to fault Richmond. It's instead of giving up 13-5 in the second half, if that had been, 11-7, I think it probably just feels and looks a little better, but they were only down 12 at half, and I think they had the first goal of the third quarter as well. I might be mistaken on that.
Thoughts on Noah Balta springing forward a bit more? This was, I guess, something expected when Jacob Blight was announced to be in. You had him forward at times, as well as Jacob Kazitsky, who I know is hurt and out now.
You know my opinion on this. He's a defender. He's not a bad forward, but he's so good for their defense.
Even though the ranks are thin, I'm still all for keeping Balta in the back. If you're looking at an immediate solution there, it's Blawstone commanding play there. Balta and probably the biggest positive for Richmond and someone I'd consider for a polished turd vote, Ben Miller. Now, Charlie Curnow did kick 2 again. He's kicked 2 in every game this year at least, which is an incredible streak. But overall, Miller put up one of the better fights against the double Colemans. He's another one that people are really starting to notice. Before this year, I think there were a lot of questions about which spot was best for him in terms of defense, another ruck, a secondary ruck option, maybe springing forward at times. He did kick 6 goals in 2023, but he's established himself as one of the key pieces of their back group. I wonder how much of that was out of necessity with so many players going down early this year, and how much of it was planned from the beginning, but I am continuing to like Miller's development.
Yeah, he's had like the ups and downs you'd expect and want to see of someone at this age.
I find it funny all the talk about the Blues, being the flag favorites now. Do you not remember what the Swans did to them a few weeks back? Also, you're beating up on 17th. Yes, an improved 17th place team, but 17th.
I think Carlton are currently the second best.
I think that's pretty clear.
But guys, are we I mean, how much of this is stuff people are saying just to try to generate clicks, and how much of it is like actually genuine? West Coast 4-9-33 defeated by Hawthorn 14-10-94.
Well, at least the Eagles outscored themselves from last year in Launceston and held the Hawks to a lower score. But this was a low effort game from the beginning. I could note two players who gave a damn through the whole game and actually succeeded. And they're the ones that you'd expect all along.
Jeremy McGovern and Tom Barras?
Yep, I had McGovern as their best. No offense to Barras at all, but McGovern, I think, was the more active one from the beginning. And also, he ended up getting a 50-meter penalty and a goal, which was, a fun moment there for him actually to kick a goal. That was his first in a couple of years.
Was the goal like right from the goal square?
No, it wasn't. He had an intercept mark, then Dylan Moore ran through the protected area, and so he got a decent look, but not a goal square gimme.
Okay, because I was going to say, if it was, then there would have only been like 3 legitimate goals they really played through. I gotta ask, what happened then, as someone who watched like pretty much none of this game? I know that Hawthorn was inaccurate early and could have buried him much more quickly.
And yes, Nick Watson was part of it, but he did end up kicking a goal.
But what happened with the likes of Harley Reid, Elliot Yeo, and Tim Kelly? Because you would think something there would click.
They were straight up outdone at the contest. I don't think it started out as an effort thing, but I think it ended up being a demoralizer in the end. And James Warple was a clearance monster. Jai Newcomb physically succeeding as well. Connor Nash doing enough of an occupying job there on Reed. And all of that was serviced by the good ruck work of Lloyd Meek. And especially once Matt Flynn went down with an ankle injury, it became even more obvious. I just want to know what the hell is going to change from this game, because I expect the answer to be nothing. And right now I expect Adam Simpson to ride out his contract through 2025, despite clearly not being an AFL caliber coach any longer. You're playing a team that is able to transition the ball super easily. So what do? You don't even oppose them in the middle, despite having the horses to potentially do it, and you flood way too often.
It seems like in Eagles land, there's hardly anyone who's really caping for Simpson at this point. There's not a lot of, but he won a flag, and there's not anywhere near as much of, he just doesn't have the guy. This is not a good team.
It's been 6 fucking years since the flag.
But this is a team that should be good enough to at least be competitive, especially at home, especially with an potential crowd.
And this was their healthiest team that they've trotted out for the year, and they on a refund of the nearly 50,000 people that showed. Intercepts were important right away, and James Sicily obviously was the big reason for that on Hawthorn's side of things. He ended up, I think, dislocating his shoulder again and is questionable for this coming week. But even in the 3 quarters or so that he played, he was effective enough to definitely garner some coaches' votes and maybe even some outside Brownlow consideration. Yes, even as a defender. You were spot on, Ethan, with the Hawks missing chances to bury the Eagles early. I noted early in the second quarter, that from their first 21 inside 50s, they scored 21 points. 3 goals, 3. I mean, things are looking rosy enough for the Hawks, all things considered. Who thought they'd have been in this spot at this point? Percentage out of the 8. I think this is just mind-blowing. I believe this is the deepest it's been in the history of the AFL, that you've had just a 6-point separation between 3rd and 13th. It's the first time that this has happened later than round 8, in fact.
I had been saying for a couple weeks, no, there are 12 finals capable teams. There are 13, and then I could try to talk people into the Saints still just because they defy expectations. Oh yeah, the Saints are completely out of it.
Whoa!
I think I made that clear last week.
Okay, this is a major change for you.
Yeah, which means inevitably they're going to go out and, they're not going to beat the Swans this week. I feel supremely confident in saying they're not going to beat the Swans. But they're going to go and pull off a couple of games between now and the end of the year that are going to be kind of like nonsensical.
And season killers.
Possibly. Very possible. But like, guys, this Hawks team is pretty quality. I'm really looking forward to their game in Tasmania against Freo in a week.
The Hawks were just using the ball really well right up until they looked inside 50. And I want to say that's promising considering this was a week that they managed Luke Brust. But Jack Gunston got some wins playing kind of back shoulder on Tom Barris, not the usual approach to playing against him. And Barris definitely was a bit flustered by that. I also like seeing Chanquit Jaff follow play forward in the first half, really following things through the center square. More of that, please, for CJ.
He's the type of guy who can absolutely afford to gamble on those.
Oh, he's got the motor for it, no doubt.
More just like wishing that make sure that you don't also have Sam Frost doing reckless things at the same time.
And guess what? They didn't. You want to talk reckless in this game, you know where I'm going.
Harley Reid?
No. Wait, did he get coaches' votes?
I think the coaches' votes were all Hawks.
I can't believe it. Liam Duggan actually didn't get votes. Highest fantasy rating in this game, a club leading 28 disposals, and a game high 8 turnovers. He is an ineffective accumulator at this point, and his play is not fitting of a captain. I want to run through multiple brick walls for Oscar Allen. I would not jump onto the comfiest bed in the world by comparison, or to like anything of the sort for Liam Duggan.
You know, at halftime of the Geelong game, I had said, like, all right, Eston had opportunities and didn't cash in. Time to get opportunities and make them pay. I guess the Eagles never really did that at halftime. Do they have any, like, mentality of it? Or were they just kind of... You make it sound like there was none of that. You make it sound like they were just there to collect a check and go home.
It's a combination of Chelsea fan angry rant man.
There is no passion, there is no vision, there is no aggression, there is no fucking mindset in this football club.
And the late Claude from AFTV.
It's time to go!
Let's get to something far more exciting, far more pleasing to talk about. The nominees for this week. The round 15 winner for Mark of the Week was Josh Tracy rising in the back of the pack over Sean Darcy. I said I liked that one. You saw from the reverse angle that Tracy did get his knee onto Darcy's shoulder, and we're just big fans of the Cyclone in general. Your round 16 nominees had Cam Rayner with a knee into Taj Woden's back. I definitely saw that as the weakest of the three. Then on Sunday, you had the other two. Tom Brown leaping pretty much over Matthew Owis's shoulder, and then Mabir Chol with another great grab, going over Josh Rotham as the fourth man in a pack. Ethan, I imagine you're debating between Brown and Chol?
Actually, I really wasn't impressed by the Brown one at all. I thought he went more around him than over him. I'm taking Chol here.
I'm comfortable with either, and we're big Mabir fans, so why not?
Goal of the week last week was Trent Rivers, with a pretty ridiculous individual effort, starting with a stoppage, getting a crumb past Jackson Archer, beating Jai Simpkin, faking out Zach Fisher, and then kicking from just inside 50. Your round 16 nominees, I think this is a pretty good mix. You've got Paul Curtis bursting through a pack after a Bryn Teakle drop, and then he grabs it, takes 3 steps, and kicks around his body in the left pocket. Jordan Goey crumbing out of 50 meters, running towards the right boundary and kicking from 46 in the corner. You got Nick Dacos with a 3-kick sequence, give and go with Jack Crisp. Then he kicks to Bobby Hill, who drops the mark but manages a handball to him. And then he fakes Bodie Uland, who scores from about 30 meters out.
Nick Dacos will win this vote, and I will not be mad about it at all, as much as I love what Paul Curtis did. That single-handed center bounce all the way to the goal play might see Nick Dacos as a finalist over Harley Reid because he's Nick Dacos.
My measurement of these is always just like what impresses me the most in real time. And I did not watch this in real time, but going back and watching it on replay, like as I'm actually watching the game unfold, the Paul Curtis one, because it was kind of out of nowhere. That's my pick. I'm going Paul Curtis.
I don't mind it. I think any of these would be solid winners.
They're all good, but yeah, I'm on Paul Curtis here.
We've been spoiled for goal selections as of late, and the Mark finalists up to this point have been very, very clear. Your round 15 main character was Ken Hinckley. The heat was on more than ever after that 79-point loss to the Lions, and he was booed when it showed on the Jumbotron. Took it well in the media, and then he responded this week. You could say that he's a candidate for the main character again, but I would have a couple others above him. Marcus Bontempelli being the Bont, just because when he has a minor to moderate ailment, it just like, I don't know, is it like an Avatar finale thing where it just like unlocks a new level of Bont? And then I think we gotta give a nomination, if not the main character, not as a whole, to Logan McDonald.
I think we got to leave this up to a vote, though, yeah?
Yeah, and I will launch that pretty soon, if not already, by the time you listen to this. We're tired, though, on completely different sides of the continent for completely different reasons. This has been fun. We're going to go back and definitely brush up on the games that we saw less of going into the preview as well. Maybe we'll have some Mad Libs there? Question mark? Who knows? Until then, you can follow me individually at BenjaminHK01, him at Castle Media,
Ryan Harambe on Instagram at Cat Named Brian, and us collectively on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Americans Footy. Thanks as always for your support. Most important thing that we just want to ask of you, the listener, please give us feedback on what you would like to see us do more and less of, how you'd like these shows kind of organized, because your input does matter.